Where's all the algae? I was promised algae. This is meant to be a dead lake. This week we're going to talk about Lough Neagh. For those of you who aren't from Northern Ireland or you just happen to have been living under a rock for the last 3 years, Lough Neagh has become a key battleground in the fight between environmentalists and farmers. And in this week's video, I am going to tell you the truth. That a lot of the information around Lough Neagh is just lies and propaganda. I genuinely cannot believe all the algae's gone. Really did not expect that. I actually came to one of the worst parts of the lake, judging by the satellite images. And there's just no algae. Oh, we've actually found some. There you go. Blue-green algae. And just in case you think I'm not actually at Lough Neagh, proof. Let's go find somewhere nice to set this camera up. And I will begin to share the vast amount of information stuck in my head about Lough Neagh. So for me, the story of Lough Neagh really begins back in 2023, when I made a video challenging the fake news around what was causing the algae in Lough Neagh. I essentially just shared a piece of research called the Muse Report, which was published in 2022 and took a scientific, factual view on what was causing the algae blooms in the lake. I actually can't believe there's no algae. I'm gutted. I did try and write a script for this video, but it just wasn't working. I just lost all of the personality. So we're just gonna wing it. Is this a good spot? Oh no, my bum's wet. Oh, no, this is not good. And we've reached the end of the trail. Oh, okay, we'll walk back. We'll start this video by answering a very basic question. What is blue-green algae? Well, first of all, it's not a plant. It's actually a bacteria. And that fact is very, very important because it means you can get rapid exponential growth with the right conditions. And it also means that the blue-green algae, or the cyanobacteria, oxygenates the water. That will matter when we come on to all of the lies and propaganda reported by the media. So then the next logical question is, what causes blue-green algae? And for that we are going to use the Muse Report, that wonderful piece of research that was published before Lough Neagh and blue-green algae just became a political tool. According to this peer-reviewed research, the biggest factor on how much algae appears in the loch is water temperature, which makes sense when you know it's a bacteria. To get the explosive growth, you also need nutrients, both nitrogen and phosphorus, and the ratio between them is very important. We'll come on to that later on. And the final thing which really encourages cyanobacteria's growth is sunlight, which is why the invasion of zebra mussels into this lake is so crucial to this story. Zebra mussels are filter feeders. They clean the water, which allows sunlight to get down deeper, both warming the lake and allowing sunlight in further. Again, all encouraging the growth of cyanobacteria. The second point I want to address is who got the blame for the algae in Lough Neagh? And to answer that question, we have to go all the way back to 2023, when the algal bloom in Lough Neagh became a very big topic here in Northern Ireland. From the outside, it might seem like the outrage about algae in Lough Neagh was organic, but I really have my doubts whether that was the case. There's a few reasons which I'm not going to mention here, trying to keep myself out of trouble, as to why I think that it was more manufactured than people might believe. But I will share one really interesting example which supports the idea that there was vested interests pushing this as a scandal. Back in 2023, once the media had picked up on the story, NIEA, which is the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, held a series of meetings across the country. And it was at them series of meetings where NIEA presented this slide about dissolved inorganic nitrogen found in the lake. They even put a big red circle around it to show the catastrophic exponential increase. And it was because of those meetings held by NIEA that the media started reporting that the cause of the algal bloom was because of farming, specifically linked to nitrates and to dairy cows. But that is just not true. The nitrates levels in Northern Ireland rivers have been consistently falling, and the most up-to-date information shows that over 90% of rivers are rated excellent for nitrates. And if we look back at the Muse Report, we find that there is a really strong correlation between nitrates in our rivers and nitrates in the lake. A little interesting side note to the story on nitrates in Lough is that Deirdre would never share the data with me. I have now requested it 3 times through 2 different MLAs, and they have always refused to give it to me. Once stating that they had sent me the data, but they sent me the wrong data. Then they claimed that the data was not properly correlated yet, until the final time I requested the data at the start of this year. Andrew Moore's office just flat out lied and said that they didn't record dissolved inorganic nitrogen from the loch. So why would they not want to share that information? Because it proves that back at the meetings in 2023, when NIEA shared this graph and insinuated that it was because of farming, they lied. They knew that was not the truth. And if you're a farmer, you know that this spike in 2022 is not because of agriculture, because that is the time when the fertilizer price went mental. And we even have figures to prove that. In 2017, Northern Ireland imported around 50,000 tonnes of nitrogen fertiliser, but by 2022, that was down to just 40,000 tonnes. So the amount of nitrogen fertiliser used is falling. The amount of nitrogen in the lake, according to one single source with one single figure, which shows up in these graphs, has massively increased. Doesn't take a genius to work out, it is not related to agriculture. I'm focusing on the increase in nitrogen because it's a really good example of a point I want to get across. That there is people who stand to gain from making a big deal out of the algae in Lough. And they are willing to manipulate data to get what they want. So hopefully you now understand what blue-green algae is and that farmers are unfairly getting the blame for it. So the next question is, how bad actually is it? And this is another really interesting topic of conversation. This guy on YouTube made a brilliant video about the algae in Lough Neagh last year. However, it is full of lies and misinformation.
This disgusting mess has been linked to the deaths of multiple dogs here over the last few years, and it's also killed horses, cattle, birds and fish.
And honestly, I don't blame him, because no doubt he has read the news and got his conclusions from that. The claims being made are that blue-green algae is killing fish, killing dogs, killing horses, and might even kill you. However, all of them claims are absolutely untrue. AFBI, a research institute here in Northern Ireland who is responsible for monitoring the lake, confirmed in 2024 that they could find no evidence of any negative effects on the fish. There has been claims that birds have died, but again, there is absolutely zero evidence of that. And the claims that a single dog died from this algae, again, you can trace it back. It came from one man who said his dog died because of the algae, and then there was no proof that the dog actually did. You will hear things like cyanobacteria can produce toxins, which is again half true, but it depends on the strain and it depends on the environment they are in. Another half truth is that the water in Lough Neagh is testing positive for the chemical that blue-green algae can produce. And again, that is true, and it is above the European Union's minimum safety level, but that minimum safety level is set so far below a toxic level that would cause any harm that the water is totally safe, as confirmed by the Food Standards Agency and by the people responsible for our drinking water, NI water. So how bad is the algae in Lough? It's not that bad, it's massively exaggerated. So hopefully by now you're beginning to get the idea that the algae is a problem, but it is not a dead lake, it is not an ecological disaster, and that it is not killing wildlife. There's a man on a boat. You're hopefully also realizing that the loch is being reported in a really misleading way. And then you have to ask, why? Why is this happening? Who stands to gain from making a big deal out of the algae in Lough Neagh and blaming farmers? Let's start with the most simple one to answer: the political motivation for making a big deal out of this crisis. Our Minister for Agriculture and the Environment is a wonderful man called Andrew Moore. He is a member of the Alliance Party, which could best be described as a bunch of left-wing nuts. And to appeal to his voter base, he has said that he is going to tackle Lough Neagh. That is his central piece of what he hopes to achieve in his time in the Department of Agriculture. So he is highly motivated to make a big song and dance about it so that he can be seen to do something to tackle it. That is actually where the NAP proposals came from. I have another entire video planned on the misinformation and deception around that. But the background to Lough Neagh, the setting up of nitrates as the issue, And our minister betting his political career on solving that does help explain some of the insane policies within this document. The other part of this story is what does the civil servants hope to gain? The Department of Agriculture employees. Well, I think a lot of this has stemmed from NIEA's desire to get an independent department from the Department of Agriculture. And when you look at what the demands are and what the solution is to this, an independent Department of the Environment always comes up. And then finally, who stands to make money out of this? And that's a little bit more complicated, and this is very much straying into my opinion. But one of the most fascinating things back in 2023 for me was that anaerobic digestion was sold as a solution to the algae in Lough Neagh. It was sold as if it itself could take phosphorus out of slurry, out of dairy slurry. We've already established that dairy farms are not the issue here. It is not related to nitrates from farms. And it's pretty obvious to everyone who has a brain that anaerobic digestion does absolutely nothing for phosphorus. However, it was continuously mentioned as a solution. And I have some more information which again reinforces that theory, but I'm not going to share it because it might be wrong and I might be assassinated. But if you fast forward 2 years to today, here in Northern Ireland we now have a programme called the SULS programme, the Sustainable Use of Livestock Slurry. And the plan of that programme is to force every dairy farmer in the country to separate their solids from their slurry, to give them solids to an AD plant, which they can then use to produce energy and pull the phosphate out of it. These are huge 20 megawatt AD plants, which will require hundreds of thousands of tons of silage. They are a core part of our Department of Agriculture's plan to reach net zero. And conveniently, they are going to be forced through planning and get huge amounts of funding from government and put the legislation in place to force me to separate my solids and give it away to these AD plants, all on the guise of trying to fix Lough Neagh. Interesting side note, the company who plans to build the first one of these mega digesters, which cost tens of millions of pounds, is a coal importing company who also produces cement. The most carbon intensive business in Northern Ireland is the one who is going to go green. What a load of nonsense. Suffice to say, there is political capital to be made in a crisis, there is careers to be made in a crisis, and there is money to be made in a crisis. All at the expense of Northern Ireland's family farms. Could I actually go for a swim in there? How deep is it over there? Now, I don't want to leave this video here because so far I have offered no solutions to the problem. And there is a problem. There is too much phosphate in the lake bed that's accumulated there over decades. And yes, a large amount of that phosphorus did indeed come from agriculture. I would argue that that is in fact not farmers' fault because the advice was always given to apply lots of phosphorus fertilizer to make sure your grass grew. So I'm going to put the blame for that squarely at the Department of Agriculture. Yeah, that's not that appealing. There's some sort of weird weeds in there. I'll maybe find another part of the lake to go for my swim. So, solutions. What are they? Well, NIEA and DAERA come at it from the angle that all farmers want to cause pollution, that they're all guilty, that they're bad people who need to be punished. But that's a really bad approach to take. A much better approach is to take the view that farmers want to avoid nutrient offlow. They want to avoid pollution. And if they took a proactive approach that wasn't just all about penalties, I think they would get much better results. I'll give you a real world example from my own farm. January 2024 was really dry, and I knew that I should be spreading my slurry because I had enough storage to get to the start of February, but I didn't have any spare capacity. But of course, I wasn't allowed to spread my slurry because of an arbitrary date in legislation. If I could have approached NIEA and explained my situation, that I wanted to spread my parlour washing tank, for example, which is essentially just dirty water, get that out of the way, so if the start of February was wet, I had an option. If I was allowed that flexibility, I wouldn't have had to spread slurry at the start of February when I was allowed again, despite the heavy rain. The point I want to make is that if you box farmers in through bad legislation, you leave them with no options, which is when pollution happens. Another really good solution would just be providing farmers with information. Am I polluting my rivers? I have no idea, but I would love to know. And if it turned out that my river, for example, was receiving extra nitrates, I would definitely be more cautious about the systems and the way I was doing things. But I need that information to make the changes to improve water quality. Another good solution for avoiding runoff from farms would be simply allowing farmers to build more slurry storage. The fact that that is not allowed through planning laws is absolutely insane. And also engaging with farmers about where the pollution might be coming from. If you do share the river quality data, you do identify farms which have increased runoff or stretches of river which are seeing extra phosphorus being released. Go to the farmers and try and solve the problem. Don't go to the farmers and threaten them with huge fines, because they're just going to cover everything up and they're not actually going to fix the problem. That's the solutions that I could see working for agriculture. I don't know enough about the other sectors to comment, but there is one more thing we're going to go and see, which could be a potential solution for this loch. I forgot my jumper. I'm meant to be there to see this thing at 12. I'm going to be cutting it fine. You won't have seen it in the video, but there was a surprising amount of people about there this morning, and I got some very funny looks. What is my life? Right, we're going to another lake to see this magical machine in action. Oh my days. Okay, so I'm not going to show you that solution. That meeting was a total waste of time. Oh my days. Anyway, I'll conclude this video back at the farm. Let's recap and then conclude. I'll set you on my illegally high bale stack. Just no one tell Dara. First of all, it's important to remember that blue-green algae is actually a bacteria, which means that under certain conditions it can experience rapid growth, especially when the water temperature increases. That is why in 2023 and this year we have seen large algae blooms. The water temperature has been high, there's been enough nutrients there to allow the bloom to grow, and the water has been cleared by zebra mussels, ensuring that that algae gets plenty of light. The reasons behind the blooms are many, and there is lots of interactions between different variables, but that's not how it's portrayed in the media. The narrative put forward, in large part by NAEA, in my opinion, is that farmers are to blame. And rather unfairly, that dairy farmers are to blame. Then we looked at how bad the algae actually is. And despite what you'll read in the news, if you can even call the Guardian news anymore, Lough Neagh is not dead. It is not an ecological disaster. It's not actually killing any animals. Then we zoomed in on one example of some of the misinformation that is out there around the issue of nitrates. Counter to what you might think, nitrates has been falling in Northern Ireland waters, but that has a knock-on effect on the amount of phosphate released from the lake bed. And it is that nitrogen and phosphorus balance, which when they line up perfectly, can exacerbate algae blooms. So in a simplistic way, the fall in nitrates can lead to an increase in phosphates, which can make the issues worse. Then we briefly looked at why people might be trying to mislead other people. Whether it's to make them extra money through the promotion of an insane biogas scheme, whether it's to try and separate the Department of Agriculture from the Department of the Environment, or whether it's just perceived to be a vote winner. Everyone has their own agenda, and that can lead to manipulation and misinformation. And then finally, we talked a little bit about the solutions. And honestly, the nonsense that I just seen half an hour ago kind of illustrates the point. There is no easy solutions. There is no quick fixes for Lough Neagh. This problem has taken decades to get to this point, and it's only really become an issue in the last 2 or 3 years because of circumstances. Environmental factors like zebra mussels and air temperature. And whilst there might not be any simple and quick fixes, that doesn't mean there is not smart things we could do. However, unfortunately, the Department of Agriculture doesn't want smart things that might actually work. They want simple and easy to administer things which they can claim works. Remember, this all has to be solved before Andrew Muir's up for election again in just 2 years. Fundamentally, I think the solution is not a knee-jerk reaction. It is not a blanket policy over all of Northern Ireland. It is taking the time to understand the sources of pollution and address those sources at an individual level. There is no easy fix. There is no quick solutions. Right, I'm gonna wash this tractor. I live a very weird life. Once again, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And if you like what was said in this video, please do give it a like, share the video, comment. All of that helps more people see this. And if you haven't yet subscribed, I would highly recommend it. It actually doesn't cost you any money, you know. Anyway, I'll see you next week when we're finally going to test these tires on the plough.